Where in the Great Basin are we today? Boundary Peak and the White Mountains. So today we are barely over the California state line, and we like to claim this part of the world as honorary Nevada because it definitely is in topography and personality. But this region of the Great Basin that we're in today is right at the very tippy top of the White Mountains, which are just behind me right there. And that is Boundary Peak and Montgomery Peak. But Boundary Peak is Nevada's tallest summit peak. So Johnny and I were working on a project a couple years ago where we summited Nevada's 5 tallest peaks. And we pretty much did it in 1 year, didn't we?
Pretty close, I think. Yeah.
And so it's Boundary Peak is Nevada's tallest peak at 13,140, somewhere around there. And then there's Wheeler Peak, which is in Great Basin National Park, way over on the eastern side of Nevada. And that's also at 13,000 feet. And then there is, the third is Mount Moriah, which is also part of the Snake Range in that Great Basin region. And then number 4 is Mount Jefferson in the Alta Toquima Wilderness, which is pretty close to Nevada's geographic center. And then the 5th tallest peak is Mount Charleston, and that's like right in the Las Vegas metropolitan area. But we had a great time summiting Boundary, even though, man, it's a little bit of an ass burner hiking up that mountain. It's so high elevation that anywhere above 13, you kind of start to get a little lightheaded. But we hiked it in, I think it was June of like 2016. And even though there's no snow up there, we definitely started to get trapped in like a freak weather system blizzard in the middle of June. And yeah, it was wild, but it is a beautiful hike if you can make it up there. 4 miles and man, lots of elevation. Anyway, this specific region that we're in right now is this really cool part of the West. So we are east of Mammoth, west of Tonopah, north of Death Valley, and south of Mono Lake, and kind of like the entrance to Yosemite. And like I said, in this particular valley, we are right at the very tippy top of the White Mountains. So the White Mountains are a north-south range that mostly lies in California. So we're right on the edge here of the California-Nevada state line, and Boundary Peak and Montgomery Peak are both right up there. And people will tend to get a little bit persnickety about this because the state boundary goes right through them. And Montgomery's on the California side, Boundary's on the Nevada side. And some people get kind of hot under the collar about this being Nevada's tallest peak because it's a subsidiary peak to Montgomery, which means that it's just like another part of that summit, but it's not the true summit on the mountain. But we definitely claim that as Nevada's highest summit point. I think it's maybe like 100 feet, 80 feet over elevation of Wheeler Peak, which is in Great Basin National Park. But without question, Boundary Peak is Nevada's tallest summit peak. It lies squarely in Nevada. It's at 13,147 feet elevation. And so aside from beholding Nevada's tallest peak, the rest of the mountain range, so this is just the very tippy top northern part of the White Mountains, most of it lies within California and is in Inyo National Forest. And the White Mountain range contains a bunch of really high elevation peaks, like White Mountain Peak, which is 14,252 feet elevation. And it's an extinct volcano, which is pretty cool, but it's also California's 3rd highest summit. And it includes the White Mountain Research Center, which is a high altitude research station that basically studies the effects of altitude. And the cool thing is, because that research center and a 4-wheeling road basically leads you right to it, and scientists need to consistently get in and out of it, White Mountain Peak is considered to be the easiest 14er in California. So if you're not able to do Mount Whitney, which is the tallest peak in the lower 48, which is like one mountain range over, that's maybe a good contender for you. I think from what I understand reading about that, there's like a service station road that you can basically just drive right up to, and then it's like an easy flat trek along that same road with something like 2,000 feet elevation gain. So if you're after a 14er, it sounds like that one's a pretty easy summit. So, and in addition to White Mountain Peak, Montgomery Peak, and Boundary Peak, the White Mountains contains at least 6 more summits over 13,000 feet in elevation, which is pretty cool. I mean, this is a really high altitude mountain range. Besides it being super high in elevation, the Inyo National Forest is also really special because it contains a really cool ancient bristlecone pine forest, which is home to the oldest bristlecone pine tree on the planet. So the entire study about the ancient bristlecone pine was, of course, done in Great Basin National Park in Nevada, which is one of the reasons that it became a designated park. And that study happened like in the late 1960s, where a group of scientists really studied those ancient bristlecone pine groves that are now in modern day park boundaries. And for a long time, the Prometheus tree that's in Great Basin National Park was considered to be the oldest. It was right around 4,800 years old. But then when they discovered this other ancient bristlecone grove in the White Mountains, it beat it by about 2,000 years. So the oldest bristlecone pine ever discovered on the planet is called the Methuselah tree, and it's in the White Mountains, and it's estimated to be right around 5,000 years old. So that bristlecone, like I said, we are way at the northern end of the White Mountains, which dips into Nevada. But this mountain range goes way further south, like pretty much into the northern end of Death Valley National Park. And that grove of bristlecones is way further south and into California. But a lot of people use that as practice to get, acclimated to the high elevation of hiking Mount Whitney. And from what I understand, that's also a pretty cool, like, overnight backpacking trip to that bristlecone grove. Yeah, so we're excited because we're out here for the weekend. It's beautiful July weekend in some high elevation terrain. And even though we're barely over the Nevada state line, we like to claim this as an honorary location. So yeah, we're going to check out some cool old silver mining ruins, talk about the White Mountains and how special they are. I think we're going to make a white buffalo pendant in there somewhere too. It's a hot heat out here, boy. Jing, how hot is it?
Hot.
It's maybe like in the 70s or 80s, but we need to get in some cool water in the shade ASAP. We've had a gorgeous day at our campground here. July in the Eastern Sierra is absolutely beautiful. We're watching the sunset right now, and wow. I got this piece of white buffalo turquoise, and I thought, dang, that is a great way to commemorate the White Mountains and Boundary Peak, Nevada's tallest peak. So let's make a necklace. Right over there is our boundary. Wow. Put on pants for the first time today. Now we're at a race against the light. Let's see if we can whip this thing out. So it was really hot here today. Oh my God. It was like in the 90s, but it felt like it was like about 150 million degrees. So it was hot, man. We had access to our little private pool here, and it was gorgeous because we just were able to kind of zone out all day and just have a good time. So the Owens Valley Paiutes were the first people to live in this region. They lived here thousands of years ago and moved along, like, you know, Nevada's Great Basin moved in and out of the valleys with the change of season, and depended on, you know, mountain water runoff and the natural hot springs in the area as a life source. So once silver was discovered in the area and it attracted a ton of prospectors and other American dreamers, it wasn't long before the militia intervened and basically forced them out of their homeland and onto an Indian reservation near Bakersfield. The Owens Valley Paiute were the first people to live in this region, though, and even earned the nickname hot water people. So we've got our stamp on the back. Now we're going to solder this guy. So people first started to show up around here in the mid 1850s, searching for gold and silver. You know, the California gold fields called most people as far west as they could go. And then a bunch of really famous ghost towns in this region started to spring up all right around the same era. So further south in the White Mountains is Cerro Gordo ghost town, which is really, really cool. There's a guy that's living there that is really fixing it up. And then there's Bodie ghost town, which is closer to Bridgeport. And Bodie is still probably, you know, the most famous ghost town in California and a lot of the West today. I mean, it is so well preserved. It's really a cool place. So you've got Cerro Gordo, which I think was like California's Virginia City, and then you've got Bodie, and of course where we are today, Benton. There was another silver discovery, which, you know, brought, I think the population was like around 1,000 people at its peak. There wasn't a lot of law and order going on back then in the mid 1800s. And throughout the West, Benton, word on the street has it that it became known as the town without law. We just were kind of up cruising around the cemetery, and man, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what it said, but it was something like, many came here, few succeeded, some stayed forever. Yikes. And I will tell you that we have been in this region when it is the middle of winter, and it is very, very cold. It's not fun to be here. So yeah, I think it would probably be pretty freaking difficult to survive around here in the winter months. But lots of people did. So what happened was silver bounties pretty much kept this place going for a long time. Hang on 1 second. Okay, we brought some light to see if we can kind of try to wrap this thing while it is still light outside. As I was saying, so silver brought a lot of people to the region, and really Benton experienced its biggest boom from like the mid 1800s through the turn of the 20th century. Benton's population was right around 1,000 people during that time, and they all stayed, you know. I think that there was a large enough population and enough going on that it beckoned a railroad station, Benton Station, which I think is just further down the road from where we're at right now. And all kinds of people, you know, lived their American dream here. They did what they could for as long as they could here, up until I think pretty much the mines just started to bust. You know, they had discovered all that they were going to discover by that point. And then moved on to more prosperous places. You know, just over the border, there's, of course, Goldfield started to really pop off at the turn of the 20th century, and Tonopah, Queen of the Silver Camp. So, you know, there were other area mining camp booms that were like really big and famous that were not far from here, that they just basically hopped right over there and could basically continue their mining story. Can you grab the DEET?
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you have the thermocell?
I do, yeah, but I'm getting bitten a bunch. Thank you.
DEET assistant.
So after the whole town bust, it was purchased by this guy named Bill Bramlett. There was a hotel that was still here, you know, like all the mining elements of a frontier town, a school, and this guy named Bill Bramlett came to town in the early 1920s and decided that he wanted to purchase the town. So yeah, Bill Bramlett basically showed up in 1928. He brought his wife Mabel, or Mabel, I haven't decided how I'm supposed to be pronouncing that, and they basically took over the store, the gas station, and the original hotel, which was built in 1904, along with cattle and alfalfa ranching operation. And they lived and they worked here until they died. I think they died in that store over there. Then their grandson came to town and ended up purchasing it. His name is also Bill. And today, Bill and his wife, Diane, run this historic property here in Benton, which is super cool that they've kept it in the family and they're basically keeping historic preservation alive. So Bill and his wife, Diane, show up into Benton in like the mid-90s, and they decided to renovate the property. And there was not a lot of historic preservation that had been happening around here up until that point. And they basically, you know, started to take over and really make it cool. They did a bunch of historic renovation at the inn. There's an old bed and breakfast over there. And then they have since like taken really great care of this property. And they continue to host these really cool dinners. They host these historic dinners like once a month, or I think it might just be seasonally, where they open up the old historic inn to themed dinners, which is really fun. So like they'll have like a haunted one, they'll have a you know, like like a spirits and cocktails one. I think they had like a Victorian Christmas dinner at one point. So they're doing a really good job of like keeping the historic Benton spirit alive, and keeping like the personality of this place going. The other thing about it that's really cool is that there are some natural hot springs in the region, and they put the property into a land conservation easement, which is really neat because that prevents it from big time developers coming in and basically like changing the history of the property for the worse. So I think that they've worked together really well with a bunch of other local land conservation agencies to make sure that like the Benton story keeps going, which is really cool. Man, I've got to tell you, I think this is maybe one of the first times I've made a pendant in the dark. I thought that we maybe had some more time going, but this is pretty much a new frontier. At least we're getting some cool glow shots, right? So like I said, 70% of like about a 1,200 acre ranch is in this land conservation easement, which is super cool because it protects the property from unwanted development and also allows them to basically maintain a lot of the property's historic integrity, which is really neat. Please don't let there be a snake. I'm not prepared for that one. Okay, home stretch, home stretch. So this property pretty much used to be kind of like a hidden hideout. We used to come here all the time. There's an inn, there's a couple of historic cabins, there's some neat hot springs that are around here, and it's all reservable, but it is such a bummer because just like the rest of the hot springs in the world, they pretty much got discovered and were ruined with COVID, which made it really inaccessible, because now nobody can get in here pretty much all year long. You really have to plan ahead. Yay. Okay, I think we might have to move this inside to do the last part. This is pretty hard to do in the dark. Okay. Oh, I gotta go in there for a second. Oh man, those bugs. They're getting us. Okay, we moved into the camper because it is an actual nightmare outside. Oh my God, the bugs are absolutely horrendous. And we ran out of daylight. So we got our piece all soldered together by the skin of our teeth, which was a challenge. Now I can kind of sort of see. Oh man, my feet got bitten like 80 million times out there and it is brutal. I think that the White Mountains is such a special place. I mean, there's so much going on around here that makes it just like a really fun place to come check out. And we like it because there's some hot water around here, of course, that we can pretty much settle into. It's, like I said, become really hard to get a reservation here because, you know, COVID pretty much took over. And now people from all over the place come and it books out. Like pretty much whenever you're here, you have to make a reservation and the only next available time is in the next 6 months. So we pretty much get in the habit of coming in 6-month increments, and that's okay. It's been really fun, honestly. Like it's a really fun place to just like unwind no matter what season. And we're lucky enough to have our camper that we can pretty much just come in and out whenever we can, you know, whenever we can get a reservation, we're here. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of stuff around here that's worth so much, right? Like I'm just bezeling this right now, but there's like, yeah, so much around here that is worth checking out in so many different ways, right? Like you've got some of Nevada's coolest terrain. I love this part of the state. You're right by Goldfield, which, you know, I freaking can't stop talking about. And then you've got access to the Mammoth area. You know, there's hot springs, some of the world's oldest bristlecones. You've got all this really cool silver mining, indigenous histories. I mean, it's just a really cool part of the world. And I think that it gets overshadowed by Mount Whitney and probably Mammoth and all the other stuff that's going on in this part. So I think it's absolutely worth checking out if you can get over here. It's one of those places where you basically have to just want to be coming here and only here to check it out, but it is worth your attention every single time. So thank you for hanging with me on this chaotic as hell video with the bugs and the light. I don't know why I thought I could do this so late at night, but here we are. And this one is for you, White Mountains, White Buffalo, right in the middle of the White Mountains.